I'm showing about 120. And Carolyn's going to give me my cue here in a minute. Be patient with us. We also have a virtual attendance as well for those who registered for our annual meeting are attending virtually. But thank you all for joining us. I want to kick off our afternoon programming by introducing Commissioner Lisa Piercey, Dr. Piercey, that provide a vaccination update for us. Commissioner, we thank you so much for your work with the chamber. I know this has been a trying time. I wonder if whenever Governor Lee asked you to take this job, if you ever had any idea of pandemic, you would say the word pandemic. Well, you've done a tremendous job with your staff in navigating it. Prior to joining as Commissioner of Tennessee Department of Health, Commissioner Piercey spent a decade in healthcare system operations, most recently as Executive Vice President of West Tennessee Healthcare. So, Commissioner, thank you so much. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Bradley. You're exactly right. I did not know what I was walking into, but also neither did the governor. And as we sometimes joke, nobody gave us a choice. So we just put our head down and did the work. And we hope it never happens again. So I'm glad to be here with you today. I do have a few slides for you. While those are coming up, I'll tell you why I chose to give you the update I'm going to give you today. Everyone in this room, I am certain, has been keeping up with everything pandemic related. Whether it was testing and then the surge and now vaccine, you know the basics. You know what I would typically say in a briefing or in other types of settings. So I wanted to bring you some data today that you may not have heard. And I will give the caveat, if I did give some similar data to Blunt Partnership last week. And so if you're on that, it's a little bit of a repeat, but I think it's some data points that you're probably not as familiar with. So on this particular one, I wanted to highlight what we are doing as far as minority vaccination. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there about the raw numbers, and quite frankly, I did these on Sunday night, and so they're now about 36 or 48 hours old. We are now past 3 million doses given, and 2 million humans or Tennesseans that have been vaccinated. And then that is at least with one dose. We have exceeded over 1 million fully vaccinated Tennesseans. Those all sound like great numbers, right? Okay, just keep that in mind. We've got some not so great news in just a minute. But 1 in 3.7 Tennesseans have been vaccinated. That's really good. So this is the time that people always ask me, well, what number do we need to get to? And everybody talks about herd immunity, right? And I think people are under the impression, and I want to change this if you are under the same impression, that one day we're going to wake up and the headline in the newspaper is going to be, we've reached it. We're here. We're at herd immunity. We've got to some magic number. It's not going to happen. It's not going to be overnight. There's not going to be a headline. There's not going to be a switch that's flipped. I want you to get that in your mind because it's going to impact your businesses going forward. What's going to happen is eventually, and I don't know if that's in 60 days from now or 6 months from now. We were talking earlier, some of the predictions, particularly early in this, didn't age very well. So I have learned not to make predictions because none of us could have predicted this. So I don't know when it's going to happen, but sometime in the foreseeable future, we're going to transition from a pandemic to what's called endemic. Endemic is what flu is, influenza, which means there's always a low-level disease burden there. And sometimes for flu, it's seasonal. For COVID, probably not going to be, but at sometimes it'll spike. And sometimes we have mild flu seasons and sometimes we have hard flu seasons, but that's what this is going to go to. And so all of those people are going to continue to have infections throughout the year. And then at some point, whether it's a super spreader event or maybe there'll eventually be some seasonality, I'm not sure, we'll have a spike. So I hate to ruin your afternoon by telling you you're not going to be done with this in your businesses anytime soon. We're not going to be done with it anytime soon from a health department standpoint. But we are eventually, and hopefully very soon, going to go to a this is just in the background, and it's something that we're going to deal with. Now, obviously, the more people that are vaccinated, just like with flu, the shorter those spikes are and the less frequent they are. And so that's something that we really need to pursue is vaccination. And right now, we're on a really good track. The other thing that you've heard me talk about publicly many, many times is our focus on equity and how we very intentionally held the masses back at first to allow the most vulnerable to go ahead of the line. So specifically the elderly and the medically fragile populations. That has had a tremendous positive impact in our state on deaths and on hospitalizations. And some of these surges that other states are seeing, now some of them are in younger people, but in the states where they're still having high hospitalization and death rates, it's because there were populations prioritized ahead of those that were most vulnerable. Is there one right or wrong approach? No, but did we used a risk-based methodology, and it did cause our speed and our rollout to be slower than other states, but it targeted the individuals who were most likely to be hospitalized or die. And we've seen those positive outcomes. Now it's open for everybody. You know, we set a date, the governor mentioned it earlier, of yesterday, April 5th, but actually most counties started opening up the week of March 22nd. And I think everybody was open by the 31st. So we're all open now. And so we'll talk just a minute about how that varies region to region within the state. Last thing on this slide is our vaccination in minority populations. So to orient you to the bar graph, if you can see it on the bottom right-hand corner, this is the percent of Tennesseans per race that have been vaccinated. And so you can see that our white and Asian population are approaching about 25%. Our Black population is in the upper teens of all. So the way to read that is, I can't see the numbers from here, but for example, I think the white population is 24.2%. 24% of white Tennesseans have been vaccinated. 25% of Asian Tennesseans have been vaccinated. When you look at that in a different format, particularly on the Black population, that's been something that's been high on our radar because we know in certain minority populations, vaccine hesitancy is very high. And so we've had a very concerted focus on how to get messages to those specific communities to build trust and to build confidence in the vaccine. We know what does not work is when the government stands up there and says, oh, yeah, I'm here from the government and I say it's good, so you should trust me and do it. Yeah, that doesn't work. You have to get somebody in that community and a trusted voice amongst that population to send that message. And while I'm thinking about it, something I get asked a lot from businesses are, what can I do to promote uptake in my business? The absolutely most overwhelmingly effective thing you can do is find champions in your business and champions that are not in the C-suite. Yes, it's important for leadership to do that and to set an example and to set sort of an expectation that everybody should consider that and be educated on that. But throughout all of this, when you think about what has influenced people's behavior, it has been their tribe, right? I mean, that's something that I just never really internalized before all of this because I've been a scientist my entire career. That's the way my brain works. Don't ask me to do art. I can't do that kind of stuff. I'm a science girl. And to me, if you provided me with the right scientific evidence and I agreed with the assumptions of how you got to that evidence, that changed my mind. I didn't need anything else. And so a lot of the things, particularly early on, were, wait, we're giving people science and they don't believe us. And we're giving people science and frankly, they don't care because they're listening to the people that they know and trust and identify with more so than the scientist. That was a blow to scientists, but we had to adapt pretty quickly. And so when I'm telling you that, I'm telling you that in the vein of find the champions within your organization that people naturally gravitate to. You all have those. They're unofficial leaders. They may or may not be in official leadership roles. Get them to tell their story. And I look like her. I know her. I'm of a similar background and she got it. And she's okay. Well, I may consider that too. So that's my trick of the trade for increasing vaccine confidence. All right, Carolyn, I may need your help. All right. So this, the numbers aren't important here. This slide is to convey supply. So let me tell you a little bit about supply. Early on, really wasn't the number one factor. It was the only factor constraining our rollout was supply. Supply is no longer an issue. You can see the numbers here. Actually, since I put these together on Sunday night, they have changed. I did a call with the White House this morning, and unfortunately, the Johnson & Johnson, which is officially called Janssen, is, they had the big interruption in production. And I think we're actually going to get like 6,000 next week, which really stinks because a lot of people are gravitating towards the one and done shot. It is made with a more traditional technology, more like the flu shot, than is the mRNAs of Pfizer and Moderna. And so we're seeing a lot of uptake, particularly amongst minority populations and those who really just want convenience of wanting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So it was a pretty big blow to us to have that unexpected reduction in supply, but we were reassured this morning that that's going to build back up by the end of the month. And so I'm looking forward to that. Pfizer and Moderna are great products. They are difficult to store and to handle, particularly Pfizer. Pfizer, we're getting more of that than anything else. And it's one of those things we're starting to run out of places to put it because there aren't many places that can handle it or want to handle it. And so I'm sort of switching back and forth here from state issues to how to make it valuable for you. If your business or your entity or somebody in your region wants to do on-site vaccinations, there are multiple ways for them to do that. One is for them to become a provider themselves. There's a link on our website to do that. It's not difficult. It just have to do all the paperwork that the CDC requires. But if you think you have the capability to store and to administer that, a lot of larger manufacturing places do. They have plant nurses and have some of the equipment that they need. That's one way to get it at your business. Another way is to actually work with your local health department for something we call strike teams. So it's essentially a little mobile group that comes out and does on-site vaccinations. But probably one of the most effective ways is to partner with your local hospital or health system. And I've got a slide in just a minute that shows how effective that can be. So here's a slide that I get asked about a lot in the media. Why is Tennessee so far at the bottom? Let me tell you something. We're there, and it's probably not going to get any better. I want you to look at this list. And as a mother of four and a pediatrician, I kind of get stuck in my head which one of these is not like the other. So look at that list. There's only one state on that list that's sort of not like the other. And I think people from Indiana think they're in the South. They're really not. Thank you for agreeing with me on that. But essentially, almost all of those states are in the South. Well, what is in the South? Rural white conservatives. That's maybe been one of the biggest surprises of all of this, except that people don't really trust science. But also conservatives, and it may have been in the New York Times this morning, evangelicals have trouble with science, trusting science. And so when you think about where rural white conservatives and evangelicals are clustered, it is in the South, right? It's the Bible Belt. And we're seeing poor uptake in all southern states. So when people ask me about areas, including Nashville. Knoxville has a really good uptake. And then our other metro areas are doing fairly well. Also in the bottom right-hand corner here, like I said, I spoke to Blount Partnership last week, so I called out Blount County, but this is available for every county. I know the numbers are probably too small for you to see, but on the CDC website, you can look at a specific breakdown of your county. It's on our website as well. Here's an interesting slide. It's what we call our high-low, top 10, bottom 10 counties. This changes daily, and it may or may not be exactly the same as what's on the state's website because this actually comes out of the federal database. There's a little bit of timing lag there. But I looked at these bottom 10 and top 10, and I'll tell you kind of what I have come up with. This is not the gospel truth. It's just sort of my observation, our team's observation. If you can think of another reason for these counties to be on either side of the list, I'd love to hear them. But on the bottom 10 list, you know, I just got through talking about rural white conservatives. Okay, you can pick out the counties where those are. But there are also some kind of outliers in that: Bradley, Montgomery, Williamson County. Those are more metro type counties or larger population counties. We do think they're on the list because of bleeding over from these metro areas. So people from the metro counties are going to these nearby counties and taking up their slots. And so their county residents actually have been slower to be vaccinated. You know, that's something that we dealt with early on, is what we call vaccine tourism, where people were driving all across the state or even across state lines to get vaccinated. There was never a prohibition against that. It ruffled some feathers with mayors and folks who didn't like people coming into their county taking their doses. But that's no longer a concern now that we have widespread availability. So that's on the low end. But then on the high end, that's also an interesting list that you may say, well, what are the common factors in this top 10 list? Here's one thing, and I referenced it earlier. And again, if you can think of other reasons, I'd love to hear them. Well, let me back up. I can think of two things. So in a couple of these counties, or in several of these counties on the top 10 list, they have older populations. Well, we've been vaccinating older people longer. So that stands to reason that older people would be a higher percentage of the population, and more people are vaccinated. But the other thing that's really unique to me about this top 10 list is that you can go down. You know, I used to be a hospital executive and actually have worked in hospitals in all 3 grand divisions. Many of these counties have very strong hospital partners. And so when you look at who do people trust in the community, so they trust their doctor. They don't trust the state's doctor. They shouldn't, because they don't know me. They don't have a personal relationship with me, but you know your own doctor and you trust your doctor. And so your doctor and your hospital, when they say, hey, come on into our clinic, come on into our hospital, you're familiar with being here, you're familiar with us, we have this vaccine for you, they are much more likely to get it. So that's why I referenced earlier, if you haven't engaged with your local hospital or health system partner, it's a very effective way, and I encourage you to do that. Here's a long list of things, and for the sake of time, I won't go through that, but I just wanted to let you know that there's a lot of things we've got cooking, and kind of always, this list changes almost daily. One of the things on this list that you'll see is our partnership with TBR and THEC. We are working with community sites, community colleges and sites in communities where the public can access it. What do college campuses have? Well, oftentimes they have health-related programs. So the nurses and nursing students, lab students can come out and not only help give vaccine, but can also learn from that, as well as they usually have really big parking lots, which is something you also need to do a mass vax event. So got a lot of things in the hopper that we're working on. I just wanted to show you that to drive that point home. And then if you see no other slides and hear no other slides, these are the 2 websites that you need. This is the most important information. Vaccinefinder.org. I bet I text that link to people 4 or 5 or 6 times a day, because everybody, it's so weird. It happened to me at Easter too. Like, I have family members like, well, I only want X product, fill in the blank. And it wasn't just J&J, it was all 3 products. And they were talking to me, where can I get this product? And I said, well, okay, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. But first, I'd like to hear why you want that product. And the reasons are all over the board, but people get in their minds that they want a certain product. That's fine. Well, then they say, well, where do I find, where's the Pfizer site in Giles County? Well, I'm sorry, I don't remember that off the top of my head, but there's this really cool website called vaccinefinder.org, and it's all of the sites. It's not just health department sites. And that's one thing that you really need to remember that people still have trouble internalizing, which is there's many, many, many more places than just the health department to get vaccinated. In fact, we have 89 rural, well, I guess 95 total health departments. There are over 900 sites. So only 10% of sites are health department sites. Now they are big ones, but you've got all kinds of pharmacies and clinics and hospitals. Vaccine Finder has them all, and you can sort by product. So if you just want a particular product, you click that and then type in a zip code and tell it how far you're willing to drive, 10 miles, 50 miles, whatever. And it will show you all of the sites, including their stock, limited stock, full stock, those kind of things. The other thing is covid19.tn.gov, which is our website where you go to book appointments if you want to do that through the health department. I think people still have the notion that it's hard to get an appointment or it's going to take forever. In most cases, you can have an appointment within just a day or two. So please make sure your employees have these websites. And finally, I wanted to tell you, as the child of parents with small businesses and a family, in fact, I'm the only non-small business owner in the family. And so I have seen the impact on business. I have seen the tough decisions that you have had to make. I have also witnessed, fortunately not in my family, but in friends, have had to make some really tough business decisions because of this. I want you to know that we're working every day with you guys in mind. I think you heard that come through in the governor's comments, but we're not here just to talk about health. The Department of Health's mission is to promote, protect, and improve the health and prosperity of those in Tennessee, because we know that there is a significant economic link to health. And so it's not just the health we're concerned about, it's prosperity as well. So thank you for what you do, and thanks.
Well, again, I'd like to thank Commissioner Piercey on her leadership with the Department of Health, getting us through this past year. I'm Evan Freeman. I am the Director of Government Relations and Economic Development at EPB in Chattanooga, and also have the honor of serving as the Workforce and Education Chairman at the Tennessee Chamber. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, the Commissioner of Education, Dr. Penny Schwinn. Dr. Penny Schwinn comes from a family of educators and is committed to increasing access to excellent education for all children. She's previously served as a high school teacher, as a principal, as an elected school board member. Commissioner Schwinn earned her Bachelor's of Arts from UC Berkeley, her Master's from Johns Hopkins University, and her PhD from Claremont Graduate University in California. We would like to thank her and her staff for the work they've done with the Chamber and continue to do, and as well as the work done this past education special session. We also like to thank you for your leadership to the classroom and to workforce development. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. It's nice to see everyone. And I know that when we think about the pandemic and pandemic recovery, I think similar to what Dr. Piercey said, there has been such a close connection between what happens in our public schools and being able to open up business. And we've heard that from lots of folks over the course of a year. And I think we're continuing to hear about that call for opening up schools. What I can say in Tennessee is that 100% of our districts are open. We were 145 out of 147 for quite a while, and now we are 147 137 out of 147. But part of that driver is that we know that kids belong in classrooms if that's the best choice from their parents. And if kids are in classrooms, then businesses can be open because employees can get to work. And so we've been trying to think very critically about the connection between business and schools. And I think, frankly, we've also had some really critical conversations about what it means when students are not in school, what it means when students are not getting that regular education, and what that will mean for them when they graduate, and certainly look for employment. And so these have been a lot of these conversations across industries have merged together, and that's been, I think, a really exciting thing for us. So when we think about kind of what's been happening in relation to the pandemic, obviously it's been over a year. We had school buildings that had closed throughout the spring. We looked at that through the summer, and then we opened up really with the mindset of how do we get back to the business of educating our students in the way that we know how to teach and learn. And one of the things that we recognized very early on last spring is that this was not going to be something where, school buildings were closed, everyone did the best they could, and there wasn't going to be a longer impact. It's a really hard conversation, especially when you are talking to educators. I'm guessing the majority of people in this room either know an educator, have an educator in their family. That seems to be the thing. I'm in a family of educators and nurses, so we've had quite the year. But I think that one of the things that teachers have been saying is we are working harder than ever. We are in classrooms, we are teaching hybrid, we are teaching from home with, I was on a call and speaking to a teacher, and she had her little 3-year-old, and then I had my baby Jack, and we were just having a conversation. It was the new normal. Baby Jack was not as well behaved as her 3-year-old, but that's true. He's kind of a terrorist. But the thing that we think about when we think about kind of coming back into school is that it's like making lemonade a little bit. We're trying to do the best we can with what we have. We're also working harder than ever and getting a little bit less out of it. And that never feels good for educators, because our entire purpose is about ensuring that every single child who sits in front of us every single day has access to the best possible education. So I'm really proud with the General Assembly and what the General Assembly and the governor through their leadership have done in the special session. It's pretty extraordinary to have a special session, especially one focused just on education. And the last time that we had that as a state was certainly Race to the Top. When we think about Race to the Top, it was $500 million coming to the state over a period of 5+ years. Right now in Tennessee, we are looking at $4.5 billion coming into the state to be spent over 3 years. It's a tremendous amount of money that is supposed to go for COVID recovery and student acceleration. But as a state, before these conversations took place, the governor and the General Assembly said, we're going to do something about it and do a Tennessee solution. We're not going to wait for the federal government to solve our problems. And I think the special session really highlighted that. It focused on teacher pay increases. So we are looking at a 2% increase to salary components in that our instructional formula. We're looking at additional increases that would happen if the budget passes as proposed, that would get a 4% increase to that overall pot, or over $120 million. It's looking at literacy as a focus. We've seen nationally, but very specifically in Tennessee, that our kindergarten through 3rd grade students have been most impacted in terms of their literacy development. Why does this matter? If students aren't on grade level in terms of their reading ability by 3rd grade, they are significantly more likely, 4 times more likely, not to graduate from high school. They are significantly less likely to have positive health and socioeconomic outcomes. If they are reading on grade level by 3rd grade, they are more likely to graduate, complete post-secondary programs, and stay gainfully employed for the entirety of their adulthood. That is a big thing for a 3rd grader. I've got a 3rd grader at home. Knowing the importance of this year for her and her literacy in the middle of a pandemic is a tremendous responsibility for our school systems. And it's why I think special session, taking that leadership role on literacy, was so important. But it's also thinking about, how do we recover? We know that there are students who need more support and need more help. This has expanded achievement gaps. Our students with disabilities, our low-income students, students who did not have access to high-speed internet or technology at home, they are falling further behind. That's really hard to say. It's really hard to be in a classroom or a district and have to say that, looking at children that you care deeply about. But it is a fact. Some of our kids are falling farther behind, and we have to take bold action to address that. Otherwise, we might feel better in the short term, but when we look 20 years down the road, our students are not going to be where they could have been. And that means some hard decisions. And one of those is summer school. So the General Assembly passed a bill, the Learning Loss and Student Acceleration Bill, that requires that all districts offer summer school this summer for those students who are lower achieving or who need more supports. For kindergarten through fourth grade, so rising first graders through fifth grade, those students will have the opportunity for up to 6 weeks of summer programming, focusing on reading and math. It also focuses on play. I'm a mom of 3 young kids, and so I added play in there because I said it is summer. We want kids to be outside. We're not that mean, but it has play, and then it has stream activities. So how do we ensure that we are still focused on science and technology and engineering and math and art? We want to make sure students want to be in school, and a lot of students are most engaged in those activities. And so you'll see that in the elementary school space, 4 weeks for middle school. That essentially extends the school year by 4 to 6 weeks for our students and those students who need it the most. We're also, I think, in terms of a legacy project, you think about coming out of a pandemic, what is the legacy project? And we talk about the summer slide a lot. These summer school programs will last in perpetuity for those students who need it the most. But we know that's not necessarily going to be enough for all kids. When we're looking at high school mathematics, for example, we are seeing pretty staggering drops in student achievement when we look at our fall benchmarks. And that is because it's really hard to teach yourself statistics or geometry or calculus. Many students in high school, they've learned to read proficiently. They can kind of work their way through a social studies textbook or their English language arts curriculum, but they need that additional support in mathematics. And so we're thinking about the Tennessee All-Core, and that's a statewide tutoring core for those students who need more support. It will focus on English language arts and mathematics. It looks at what we call high dosage, low ratio tutoring. And that's tutoring in groups of 1-to-1, 1-to-2, maybe up to 3 students. But the research is clear that if you have more than 3 students in a group, it does not have lasting impact. You really need to have a very strong educator or a very well-trained tutor in front of a child, helping that child, whether they're in kindergarten or first grade, learning how to read, or they're in 11th or 12th grade, learning advanced mathematics. How do you help them move from where they are to where they need to be? And so we will be launching the Tennessee All-Core that will support up to 150,000 students. That's just about 15% of students in the state, in order to make sure that they are both growing, but also accelerating so that they do not feel the impacts of a pandemic. Now, why does this matter to business? I think the thing that I am most afraid of, not just as a parent, but certainly as a commissioner, is that over the course of the next 13 years, we will be graduating students in the state who are not as prepared as they otherwise would have been. That means that they will be taking more remedial classes in higher ed. A lot of our kids can't afford that. That increases dropout rates. It means they're not completing the certifications that they could be doing using dual credits in high school. We're seeing a drop in that. We had come so far as a state in building those dual credit opportunities, apprenticeships, work-based learning, grants for innovative high schools. How do we ensure that our students are academically prepared to engage in those programs? How do we think thoughtfully and strategically to ensure that they are still participating in these off-campus opportunities, even though it's a little bit harder, even though it doesn't look the same? But the worst thing we can do is not lean into that, because that means that students aren't getting those opportunities. It means when they graduate, they are not as ready to be in your businesses and thrive. And so when we look at kind of the funding opportunities and how we address that, we've got 3 big buckets. So we are not short on money. We have ESSER 1.0, ESSER 2.0, and ESSER 3.0. And soon to be, I just found out, speaking in one of our senator's offices, ESSER 4.0. So ESSER 1.0 was what we thought a really big deal. It was about $260 million. 90% of that goes directly to your school districts in your areas. That was just about 11 months ago. And then in December, we got ESSER 2.0. And we thought that was a really big deal because it was $1.1 billion for education in Tennessee. 90% of that goes directly to school districts, 10% is a set aside. But then we just got ESSER 3.0, and that was $2.4 billion, 90% of which goes to local school districts, 10% of a set aside. That does not include the governor's set aside for education, and the governor who also set aside over $100 million for education activities out of COVID relief. So altogether, over the last 12 months, the state of Tennessee will and has received $4.5 billion for public education in the state to support pandemic recovery. Now, that is a tremendous amount of money. When we're talking about discretionary funds to be spent in the next 3 years, specifically on K-12 schools, it's a big responsibility. I also say that because when I look at states like Arizona, when I look at states like Texas, when I look at states like California and New York, all across the country, they've made cuts in public education. They've reduced their funding formulas. They've reduced spending. We haven't done that in Tennessee. We have maintained the same funding that we have in previous years. And the legislature just committed 160 million more state dollars towards these summer programs. That means that when the feds are talking about, we need funding to open up schools, we need more funding to make sure that school districts and budgets are made whole, that's not the case here. So all of the money that I'm talking about ends up being money that we call discretionary or open use for school districts. And what we are pushing on, and what you will hear me say over and over, the governor and the General Assembly, is that we have got to invest this in a way, not just to try to hunker down, we have got to accelerate forward. Let's use this as a moment in time to say, we don't need to start to panic about what has been. It's over. The past has happened. What we can do is take $4.5 billion and be strategic in how we think about what our students are going to need in 5, 10, 15, and 20 years. Invest in that now with one-time dollars and create the infrastructure, the support systems, and the programs that are going to benefit our students for years to come. And so some of the things that we're thinking about investing in as a department really aligns to our strategic plan, our Best for All plan. And that hasn't changed. I think one of the things that I felt okay about coming out of the pandemic was that the 3 core areas that we have been focused on for 2 years are the same things that we continue to need support in. We need to really focus on high quality academic opportunities. We need to focus on student readiness and the whole child, making sure that when students graduate, they are ready to be successful. And we've got to make sure that we have world-class teachers. We are recruiting and retaining those teachers so that every child has a wonderful educator in front of them every day. Fun fact is that 10,000 of our kids right now do not have a certified math teacher in front of them every day. 10,000 children in this state. That is unconscionable when we think about what is going to be needed for them when they leave. And that's not the fault of school districts. We don't have the supply of educators. We've got to focus on that. Teachers are tired. We talk about that because if they leave the profession, we don't have a big group of teachers to come and replace them. And so these are the things that as a department, we are prioritizing, because if we have excellent teachers, we get high quality academics, we get students who are ready and who graduate and are able to thrive. So our investments are going to look like a focus in early literacy. You'll hear me talk about Reading 360, hopefully for many years to come. And that is to say that we want to go from right now, 37% of our students, 37% who are on grade level on third grade, our third grade reading and English language arts test. 37%, that's down from 50%. We need to do better. We can't have 37% of our students on grade level when we think about third grade English language arts. So we're investing $120 million in early literacy. And that's going to look like community partnerships. It looks like district implementation networks, teacher professional development. And when I say teachers are tired, I want to underscore that we have 14,000 teachers who signed up for 2 weeks of professional development in early literacy. We opened up that registration and it was completely filled within 3 days. 14,000 teachers in the state are saying, we know we can and should do better for kids, and we care enough to spend our summer doing that. So we're investing in early literacy. We're investing in the all core because we know tutoring matters for catching students up. It's one of the best and most important things that we can do. When we talk about student readiness, we've got to think about high school. And right now, we have a lot of high school students who are not engaged. The computer, as much as they're on their phones and their thumbs must hurt with all the texting that they do and their incomplete sentences, which as a former social studies teacher drives me nuts, but all of that texting, they are not ready to engage in the way that we would like them to on the computer in terms of learning. And they've left, they've gone to find work. They've gone to do other things. And there's a bunch of them that we have not figured out where they quite went. And so we are trying to build resources and processes and supports and initiatives that engage students, not just in high school, but connect them to careers. So we just put out a grant, $14 million for innovative high schools. It will build 20 innovative high schools across the state. Those are not just districts. We're encouraging districts to do regional partnerships. I say that and want to emphasize that because one of the requirements is they work with local businesses and industries to build those high schools. So the high school is essentially built to ensure that students in those programs are on a track to a post-secondary credential or a 4-year degree linked directly to jobs that are available and open in their local communities. We're starting with 20. We will likely build more. Ideally, by the end of the pandemic recovery, we are somewhere in the 10 to 20% of all high schools have a direct connection to actual jobs in the communities where those students currently live. We have to start thinking differently about K-12. It can't be an isolated experience where we just protect our own classrooms and systems. Students graduate and then we hope it works out. We have to be much more intentional about connecting future careers to students, and not just in high school, but in middle school and in elementary school, because kids start dreaming about what they want to be when they're very little. My little Jack, I don't know what he wants to be, but he runs into walls a lot. And so, maybe there's a job for that. Who knows? My little Abby wants to be on TV. I don't know what job that, I think there's a lot of jobs. My husband and I don't really like those jobs, but if she wants to be an actress, if she wants to be a newscaster, whatever. And my oldest wants to be a dinosaur vet because she watched Jurassic Park and it sounds like they have a cold. And so she feels very strongly that she can be the ear, nose, and throat doctor for any dinosaur who needs it. We haven't told her that that's probably not realistic, but you never know. But we're encouraging all of that. And they're dreaming and they're thinking and they're pretending and they're imagining, and they're all young kids. So how do we actually take all of that fun superpower work that's happening when they're little, and how do we start to channel that into, you know what, Ellie, you might really love this after school STEM program, or Abby, we're going to get you into ballet and theater and whatever else you want to do. And Jack, we are going to just hope for the best because you're the youngest and you kind of throw your hands up and hope it works out by them. But I think with, all of my kids, I want those same experiences for every kid in this state. So with our pandemic recovery funding, we are going to be investing much more intentionally in that through line from career all the way down into kindergarten and maybe even to pre-K, because career exploration is fun. Kids love to pretend they're going to be teachers or the president or a firefighter or a police officer. They love it. That's why costumes, that's why they love Halloween. Let's encourage that and make it much more intentional. And then for our educators, we have to make sure that we are supporting our educators to feel like they are appreciated, like they are treated as the professionals they are given professional development opportunities, and we can retain them. Because right now, 1/3 of the teachers in this state are retirement eligible. If they all left, that means we have 20,000 additional vacancies. We cannot fill them. It is not possible. And so we are thinking about, how do we retain our teachers? How do we make sure they are compensated appropriately? And how do we bring more teachers into the pipeline who are ready to teach all of our students so they can be really exceptional readers, they can love and be on grade level in mathematics, and they can engage in the career pathways of their choice? That is the work that is ahead of us. And I think the partnerships that you all can offer with your local districts is going to be critical in that recovery, because they are looking for that support. They are looking for those connections, and they're looking for ways as they are building strategic plans about how to spend $4.5 billion in recovery funds. They want to make sure those investments are actually going to benefit you all when those students leave them. So I encourage you to get very involved in your local district conversations. The plans are due in June, so you have some time. But I think that level of business strategy, the idea of how do you think about problems, not just from an education lens, but from a business lens, those are all things that our districts desperately need. But we are not, as educators, we did not expect to get this much money. I know districts ask for it a lot. They ask for a lot of money all the time. Now they have it. They have to spend it really, really fast. There's a lot of pressure on that from everybody. And I think the level of strategy and support that you all can offer to them is invaluable. It means that we will make better funding decisions, better strategic allocation decisions, but most importantly, from my perspective, have students who are ready when they graduate from high school to enter the profession of their choosing, because they've had access, they've had opportunity, and they've had investments that are actually important for them. So encourage you to get involved, encourage you to think very strategically about what your local communities need, and really push for the funds to do something that's going to benefit kids. It is a once in a lifetime opportunity in public education. I cannot underscore that enough. I have nothing but hope and optimism for what's going to happen in the future, but it is going to be 3 years of very, very hard work if we are going to do it well. And my goal and responsibility is to make sure that we don't just get it done, but we get it done well, because that's what our kids deserve. I appreciate what all of you have been doing during the pandemic. I know it's a lot for everybody. I feel like it's almost over. I don't think Dr. Piercey helped with that a little bit. I gave her a little bit. I was like, look, I'm done. But we will all hang in there together, because I know whatever industry or whatever field we represent, it's about Tennessee recovering together. And from my perspective, I know that education has got to be one of the core foundations of that recovery, and we are committed as a system to doing that. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you, Dr. Schwinn, for all your hard work the last couple of years. I'm Kelly Boutwell, Vice President of Member Relations with the Tennessee Chamber. It's good to see everybody in the audience, and thank you to everyone that across Tennessee and across the country that are joining us virtually via Zoom. I am excited to announce our next speaker, Dr. Bill Fox, the Director of the Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research. There's a lot to say about Dr. Bill Fox, but I'll give a snippet. The Boyd Center for Business and Economic Research is a nonpartisan research hub within the Haslam's College of Business at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. The center conducts research on national and state economic trends for UT, state agencies, public and private organizations. It also analyzes and disseminates data on demographics and the economy of Tennessee in conjunction with the Tennessee State Data Center. One of the important services that the Boyd Center does is they produce an economic report to the governor annually and maintain the Tennessee economic data for the state economy, which provides quarterly, annually, and long-term economic and fiscal forecast. Also want to mention that Dr. Fox has been a long time strong, wonderful partner to the Tennessee Chamber. Excited to have you here today. Welcome, Dr. Fox.
Thank you, Kelly. It's certainly my privilege to be here. Thanks for letting me be with you today and talk a little bit about the Tennessee economy and what's going on. So I can't actually see my slides, which is always a downside when I'm working through them because I sort of assort them. So I may have to look out occasionally to see what I'm actually talking about and have some relationship between what I'm saying and what's on the slide. So let me start by saying that I'm really optimistic. Like Commissioner Schwinn was saying at the end of her conversation, really optimistic about where the economy is going. We've had extraordinary stimulus. Now, some may argue too much, but extraordinary stimulus, both on the fiscal and monetary side. We have pent up demand in the economy that's there. We have vaccines that, more than 100 million Americans vaccinated and so forth. And so we really are in a position where 2021 is going to have GDP growth on the order of 6%, which is, again, an extraordinary number at this point in the U.S. history. And so I'm optimistic about where we're going to go. Oh, thank you. That will really help me a lot to see where I'm going. I hope I have what up there is a GDP slide, which is kind of showing you where GDP is at this point in time. Thank you very much. That will help a lot. Is it working? No. Okay. So let me just, I'll just talk and you can see the slides in a moment. So the next slide, what I really wanted to emphasize for you was the amount of stimulus that's taking place. Anybody know how much stimulus there is in total? $5 trillion of stimulus. Okay, so if I can get to the next, that one right there. $5 trillion of stimulus in these six. And that does not count the Federal Reserve buying assets and pushing the interest rate to zero. And so we've been extraordinary stimulus of the magnitude that we have never seen and likely will never see again. The next slide shows that what immediately occurs to everybody in this room, oh shoot, with all that stimulus goes big deficits, and you can see it. But I'm actually not as bothered by the stimulus in fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 and the deficits as I am by the deficits leading up to and following that. I mean, it was a really unique time in U.S. history to have the COVID-19 experience and keeping people's balance sheets in a reasonable position, helping them be able to spend. All that stuff mattered. It's the deficits around during the good economy leading up to the pandemic. And what we see from here, if you could just kind of block out those two really high deficits in the middle, notice that the trend is just upward from here. $1 trillion a year, every year for the future. Now, one of the outcomes, and you'll see this in the next slide, is that interest rates are going up. There's this perception that maybe inflation would be a problem. We're seeing this is, I'm just going out 10 years here. If I went out 30, you'd see the same thing. The yield curve has gotten really steep. We've seen the value of the dollar kind of flatten out, which is actually both a good and a bad news thing. We're seeing a little sign of inflation coming up, although I think maybe on the 2% range or something like that. And so there are some offsetting effects. Oil prices have risen and stabilized around $60. And so lots of things happening around that. But on the production side, the economy looks good. Employment is much more of a worry. And the next chart shows you employment for Tennessee compared with US. I have one more month of US data here, which actually, if you paid attention to the employment release last Friday, that's a really big difference because they reported 916,000 more people working in March. We don't have Tennessee's March data yet. And so, you know, we're actually doing relatively better than this chart would seem to suggest in terms of employment. But still, we have more than 100,000 fewer people working in Tennessee today than we had when COVID started, and 8.5 million more at the national level. Employment remains the really big issue. And the question, and okay, I've lived, you can tell, I've got a lot of gray hair. I've lived a long time. I've never seen anything like COVID. I don't have an economic parallel to say, well, this is what happened last time we had a pandemic that you know closed down the US economy for a couple of months. And so we're all kind of guessing what's happening. But my guess is that at the other end of COVID, because of remote work, because of firms adopting new technologies, because of changing demand by you and I, a bunch of people who had employment in January and February of last year won't have it at the other end. Now we'll have some new employment in fulfillment centers and transportation and some other things. And so I'm not saying there's no offset. There is some offset, but in the end, a bunch of people have to be able to transition into doing something else. The next chart then shows us what happened in terms of initial claims for unemployment insurance. And I mean, again, this was unimaginable to me before. We had, okay, there's 3.3 million people in Tennessee's economy working. A full third of those filed for unemployment insurance. An unbelievable number. And even today, we have 3 times higher initial claims every week than we would normally expect. And so this problem is far from over, even as the economy opens back up. And then the next slide shows us that I wanted to emphasize this at the beginning, and I didn't really, so I'm going to emphasize it right now. What's happened in the pandemic? Sorry, everybody in the room knows this. The impacts have been extraordinarily uneven by geography, by industry, by education level, and so forth. Well, here's an example. This is growth in every state, actually decline in every state except Utah on this chart. 48 of the 50 states still have lower employment than they did a year ago. We're the 9th best. So we're doing pretty well. You have states like New York or Hawaii, which is not on here. We're more than 10% of employment. They're down more than 10% this far into the pandemic. Really big differences across the country as to how this is played out. And I'll show you here in a moment. Next slide, what's happening around the Tennessee economy as well. This is the unemployment rate. We're much better, at least a full percentage point lower than the US because we've had such good employment growth. But the next chart then shows us that by industry, it's really different. And notice all of our broad industry categories, we still have lower employment, but within each of these, again, unevenness, very different experiences. The best performing industry, trade and transportation. Transportation is booming. That part of that sector is doing great. Go to construction. If you're doing business buildings, business structures, your activity is probably relatively weak. If you're building houses, it's great. It depends where you are. And so as you go and look at the detail within each of these categories, it's quite disparate. And of course, leisure and hospitality, we still have 1/6 fewer people working than we did before. But you know, there's good news. Last month, Sevier County showed 43% growth in sales tax revenues. Things are getting better for sure. And then the next chart shows us by geography within the state where employment losses are taking place. The bluer the chart, the bigger the losses at this point in time. And so you can see that while the Middle Tennessee broadly defined Nashville area has clearly been the leader in Tennessee's economy over the last several decades, it actually has relatively big employment losses still. On the other hand, the Knoxville area is showing much, and that part of East Tennessee is showing much fewer job losses than other parts of the state. And then our next slide shows us what's happening to tax revenues. And okay, so when all this started a year plus ago, I was meeting with and talking with lots of state leaders. And if you look at my chart, I'm just showing you growth in tax revenues by year. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going to play out exactly like the 2008-9 recession. And we're going to have massive revenue losses. And you can see, I mean, we had 2 years of really big revenue losses. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. And we're kind of calculating these numbers and we're doing some really detailed things. And again, I greatly applaud the governor and the General Assembly for saying, hey, we don't know how this is going to play out. Let's be conservative on the spending side. And they were, and on the revenue estimating side. And I think it was exactly the right decision. But things have played very differently from anything that we would have imagined, because what happened was consumers, and this next chart, if you bring up the next chart, it really shows the biggest factor of why taxes have done so well. The sales tax grew 15% last year, something I would never have imagined. And you can see, other than a couple of months, right in the depth of the pandemic, the sales tax is booming. And just massively so. Well, the next chart tells us why that's taking place. People changed how they spent their money. We gave them a lot of money through various kind of stimulus packages, unemployment insurance. What we find with unemployment insurance is people spend essentially all of that money within a couple of months. People getting this, $1,400 a month or $1,400 payment and so forth, they actually don't spend most of that money. Most of it goes into their bank account. It makes payments they couldn't otherwise afford to pay. It helps them pay down their debt. But they didn't increase their spending very much. About 15% of the money goes into higher spending. But people changed what they bought. They quit taking airline flights. They quit having elective surgery, and they started buying Pelotons, kayaks, and redoing their kitchen. Now, if you know anything about tax revenues, the stuff they quit doing isn't sales taxable. The stuff they went to doing is sales taxable. Not the labor part of building that kitchen, but the materials are. And so what ended up happening is in a what we normally expect, sales tax revenues plummet in a recession, the reverse happened, because people changed their behaviors in ways that we didn't anticipate. And so this is great. If you're in any of the industries I just talked about, where you're seeing this new spending, I mean, you've never had a better year. On the other hand, if you were doing elective surgery in a hospital, things weren't quite as good for you. And so this very uneven impact. And of course, again, the most notable thing is what's non-store retailers, just think online sales. And I mean, this is actually the lower bound of what they've been doing, up 30-40%. And this is changing how business is done in the US and in Tennessee. I'm not saying there will be no reversion back to where we were, but we aren't going back all the way. People learned I can buy groceries, have it fulfilled for me, and drive by and pick it up. People learned that they can buy even toilet paper if they can find it from the online firms and so forth, right? And so this is changing behavior. A bunch of people, if you look at the statistics on it, what you find is a bunch of people who had never gone online or never ordered their groceries in that fashion suddenly found they could do this. And it will radically change it. Well, so the next slide shows then how this has played out. So what happened at the very same time as the pandemic, and this was very good fortune. I know the General Assembly and the governor saw this coming and they anticipated this perfectly. And I'm joking a bit here, but they had really good fortune, because at the very same time the pandemic hit, we began to collect more sales tax from remote vendors. And so this is Department of Revenue went out and they identified firms that are newly collecting for Tennessee. And so the first thing that happened was we required in October of 2019, large remote vendors to collect our tax, firms like Wayfair. And you can see the revenues coming up just from those firms. But then October of 2020, we began to require marketplaces, Amazon, Etsy, eBay, Walmart to collect our tax. Look what happened then. And so, you know, the really good news of all of this was tax revenues from online sales went up. And so as people shifted to buying online, we got most of that sales tax revenue for the first time. And then the next chart shows that not only has this helped the state, it's helped the counties because much of this online activity, of course, has local sales tax associated with it. This has also led to some big shifts in how revenues take place because historically, if a person went from, let's say, Williamson County even into Davidson County and made a purchase, so they went to the Green Hills Mall, the sales tax went to Davidson County. With the online activity, the sales tax goes where the consumer is. So if you look at this, again, the greener it is, the better the growth rate. What you see is a lot of rural counties and smaller counties that formerly had consumers but not large merchants are actually doing better because of the way in which this is shifted around. And so the tax revenues have done, again, very well at the local level. They've done very well at the state level. Now, of course, at the state level, the fuel taxes, the mixed drink tax, the hall income tax are examples of taxes where we've seen big declines, but so much sales tax revenue, so much corporate tax revenue that overall the state's revenue picture has been very healthy. So to put all this together, given the stimulus that's underway, given the rapid growth in consumer confidence, what we anticipate is 6% GDP growth this year, continued good employment growth, though we're still maybe 18 months away from having as many people working as before the pandemic, but still big transitions with a lot of long-term unemployed that we need to help transition to something else and something new. It's I think a large education and training challenge for our state. But overall, there's room for great optimism as we look at the economy over the next year to year and a half. Thank you very much.
Everyone, and thanks Dr. Fox for that presentation. So we're going to shorten our break about 5 minutes. I think we got a scheduled break, but we've got two very special guests here with us for our roundtable next. If you can be back right at 2:30, we're going to get started promptly at 2:30. Thanks, everybody. All right, how's our virtual feed? Great. So if everyone, both virtually and in person, can start making your way back in, we've got a really special part of our program. Give you just a second, everybody, to get back in the room here from the bathroom break. So we can consider it win number one for the day that we've been able to get schedules aligned and get these two gentlemen here today. And they're always gracious with their time. They're always very kind to us, the chamber and the business community. And I know they always make themselves available to you also when they're back home in their districts. So I want to introduce the two folks we have with us here. You probably see on your program that Lieutenant Governor McNally is scheduled to be with us. He had a conflict that was totally unavoidable and does send his regrets and apologies. But we do have not the next best thing, but we think the equally best thing in the finance chairman, Senate Finance Committee Chairman and former Speaker Pro Tem, I might add, Bo Watson here with us. Also, you see, we've got Mr. Speaker Cameron Sexton here with us. Speaker Sexton is an 8th generation Tennessean, UTK graduate, known as a pragmatic conservative. He served the citizens of Cumberland, Putnam, Van Buren counties for 6 terms in the General Assembly. During his tenure, the volunteer state has quickly become one of the most fiscally stable states in the entire nation and a preferred destination to live, work, raise a family, and retire. Prior to being elected speaker by his peers in 2019 and reelected in 2020, Speaker Sexton served the Republican caucus as caucus chairman, former Republican whip, and House Health Committee Chairman. Speaker Sexton's prioritized conservative, patient-centered health solutions. He's fought for accessibility, improved healthcare quality, lower overall costs, and has fought for implementation of historic tax cuts. Speaker Sexton and his wife Lacey live in Crossville, and they have 3 children, Greer, Olivia, and Nathaniel. The Sextons are active at Central Baptist Church and other community and civic organizations. Chairman Watson, I'll introduce him, first elected in the 104th General Assembly. We're in the 112th now. In 2004, he was elected to represent as a state representative, District 31, which is Ray and part of Hamilton County, and then elected in the 105th as a senator in 2006 for District 11, which is all or part of Hamilton County. Currently serving in his 4th year of a 4-year term. He's appointed to serve Speaker Pro Tem in 2011, served till 2016, and in 2017, he was appointed to serve as chairman of the Finance Ways and Means Committee. He also serves on the Health and Welfare Committee, Senate Rules, Senate Commerce and Labor, which is very important to the business community, and Pensions and Insurance, among other committees. So gentlemen, it's an honor to be on the same stage with you all, an honor to have you here. Please take a few minutes now in either order and just let us know how the session's been going from your perspective so far.
Thank you. It's great to be here today. It's actually good to get out of Cordell Hall building and actually come to a meeting where we see people in a place. So thank you all for coming out. It's going well. We're almost done. We're 4 or 5 weeks away from finishing up, which means I think next week Bo starts the budget process in the Senate and Patsy in the House. And then once we get that process, we're about out of here. The state's doing very well. You heard Dr. Fox earlier about how well the state's doing. We can talk about that a little bit more. But we're hopeful that our state is leading the way for other states all across our great country on how to do it in a fiscal conservative way. And with that, I'll defer to Senator Watson.
There we go. Check. There we go. Sorry. You can tell by the depth and breadth of the invitation who the most preferred speaker is here today. I always yield to my speaker. I mean, Sessions, Speaker Sexton and I have both been here long enough now that sessions are sessions. Each has its own little quirkiness and personality. I think both of us would say, as to compared to where we were last year, this year is running along really smoothly since we have adjusted to the pandemic and the state's back on track. We should, hopefully, the speaker will determine, but maybe within the next month, we should be wrapping up our business. The budget is the most important and the only bill that we have to pass, so it gets the most attention, but it's not until this timeframe that we start taking it up. I think this year, as compared to years in the past, and it's not just because he's sitting next to me, well, maybe a little bit of it's because he's sitting next to me. I think we have had a really collaborative spirit between the two chambers in the legislature. That's not always the case, but I think our two speakers have a good working relationship with each other, and that's very important to government functioning very well. I think the two chairman of the finance committees and the two chairmen of the subcommittees that help the finance committee have good working relationships with each other. And that's really helpful in moving legislation along. So I think we're having actually a really pretty good year considering all the obstacles we've had to overcome.
Right. So all of us at lunch today heard Governor Lee mention our unemployment trust fund and how we've kept it very solvent throughout the pandemic, a big priority to everybody in this room. Talk a little bit about how your input in the process and your opinions kind of help that trust fund stay solvent, and especially Speaker Sexton, you're working on an important project related to the unemployment trust fund that Chamber's supportive of.
Yeah, thank you all. And Senator Watson and I, with Lieutenant Governor McNally and some others, served on the governor's task force this summer, the accountability group, on how we spent the CARES Act money. I won't get into much detail of that. Senator Watson can hit that as well. But we thought we did it in a very deliberate process way, where we watched what the federal government was doing, watched where the holes were and where we needed to fill in. And we spent $1 billion to keep the trust fund up. Because during the pandemic, if it dropped below the $1 billion mark, your fees and your taxes would go up in businesses in our state. And if you look at Louisiana, they're actually $100 million in the red. And those fees on those businesses in Louisiana are going to go up 4 times what they were pre-pandemic to get it back up. So it's a huge problem in some states. What I will say, that the one thing that we did learn is we thought $1 billion was a lot of money in the unemployment trust fund. And if we didn't have the Federal CARES Act, we would have ran through our money. We've been sitting on zero as well. And so we were able to use some of that money. So we have legislation looking at the unemployment trust fund. And it's going to change how unemployment works if we can get it passed, meaning right now you have 26 weeks that you qualify for at the max. We're moving that to 20 weeks at the max. Right now it's kind of just based on your income and over a certain period of time, and that's how you determine how much you get and how many weeks you have. We're hoping to move it to more match what North Carolina and Florida did on unemployment rate. So if your unemployment rate over a 6-month average is 5.5%, the most that anybody can get on it is 13 weeks. As unemployment goes up every 0.5%, it raises 1 week. So it's 6%, 14, 6.5, 15 weeks till it maxes out at 20. Because part of the problem is trying to shore up the trust fund. We have people who are getting the $300 from the federal government that's affecting all businesses in the state of Tennessee, and we need to get people back to work. And so this is a way to bring solvency to the unemployment trust fund. We think it will save anywhere from $90 to $120 million over a 3-year period, just making these little changes. And so we're hopeful that we can get it there as we go forward and change how we do the unemployment trust fund in our state.
Yeah, this is one of those things that it's kind of very Tennessee-like in that it's not really glitzy. So if you go back home, it's kind of hard to brag to your constituency that, hey, I kept the trust fund up over $1 billion for unemployment. There is no sense of what that actually means to them. But yet it's a very important part of what government does or had the ability to do. So our pragmatic and prudent approach of using our resources for that purpose rather than using it for other purposes, which may get you more attention back home or get you more attention in the media. It's just kind of how we do business in our legislature. And that's somewhat historical, Republican and Democrat alike. I mean, we're just very prudent and pragmatic about our approach to where we spend our money. We're actually being taxed right now because I don't mean taxed from from taxation, but we're being challenged because of the amount of resources that we currently have in the state. because that's not normally how we operate. We're having a hard time figuring out, okay, how are we going to spend all this federal money that's coming through? How are we going to manage this federal money that's coming through, some of which we have no control over? How is that all going to be processed? In the prior CARES Act that the speaker was referring, we had a lot of control over how we spent that money. This next round of money, we don't have as much control over, and so we're a little bit more apprehensive about how it will be managed. I think the speaker's idea on unemployment is a good one, and I'm not anticipating it's going to run into too many roadblocks.
Y'all brought up a very good point. The American Rescue Plan is projected to inject $20 to $30 million into Tennessee, including significant sums into our state coffers. From a procedural standpoint, who will make the decisions on allocating those dollars? And then maybe where do you see some of those dollars being utilized?
Okay, well, I wish it was just million, but it's actually billions of dollars that are coming into the state. I mean, we're
Million,
going to
yes.
see just in state and local government, you're going to see $1.4 billion go to counties and $944 million go to the cities, which is basically unencumbered by the state, meaning we're just through. Okay. We have up today, when I leave here and go back to Commerce, we actually have up today, and I don't know, Speaker, y'all may have already dealt with it, a bill from the financial institutions asking for us to extend the time frame for their collateralization of money, because the deposits that local governments are going to be putting in the bank are going to be so large that they're going to need additional time in order to properly collateralize the money that's going in. The governor and the two speakers, I think, will maintain our accountability work group. We may see that expand a little bit. That would be up to the speaker and the two speakers and the governor to include more members of the legislature. But quite frankly, this money is, much of this money is not going to be managed by the state. It's going to be managed at the local level, whether it's local government or whether it's your local LEA. I guess I'll make my pitch to you now. When you go back home, you need to be talking to your elected officials about how they're utilizing this money. We don't know yet what the federal guidelines are. Usually the way the feds work is they put the money out. First, they announce it so that everybody gets excited about it. Then they put it out in the communities. And then 60, 90, 120 days later, they give you the guidelines of how you're supposed to use the money. And then a few weeks after that, they change some of the guidelines if you're not using the money exactly the way they want to. And then 2 or 3 years later, they write you a letter and tell you how you didn't use the money the way you were supposed to, and they want a certain percentage of it back. And while you may think I'm being facetious, that's actually how the system works, okay? So one of the messages that we're trying to message back to the folks that we talk to on a day-to-day basis, to our local communities, is you need to have these conversations with your local elected leaders. And in all sincerity, you need to have these conversations with your local elected leaders. Some of our cities and counties are very sophisticated and will have no problem managing much of this money. Some of them, for no fault of their own, don't have that level of sophistication. And if you're using your brother-in-law Randy down the street to do your accounting for you for an amount of money that is twice what your normal budget is, you're probably going to run into trouble when the feds start putting their guidelines in. So help us spread the message of we need to move slowly and cautiously. We've got through 2023, I think, to spend the money. And we need to make sure that our local governments don't get themselves in bad financial positions because of the windfall they'll be receiving.
I'll go a little different direction. He mentioned earlier about the banking and financial institutions. What the issue that we're having is, if you talk to your local banks, when the federal government give the stimulus checks, 2-3 rounds to everybody, the PPP to everybody, what you have is an influx of deposits into your financial institutions, which then throws off your loan to cash ratio, which causes a huge problem. And I know just on a small bank in Middle Tennessee, when the last stimulus checks came in, it increased deposits by $40 million in a bank that was the size of about $1 billion. That's a lot of money that changes how you have to regulate your bank and how you can lend money. And so our worry as we go through is a couple of things with the federal government. Is the federal government has always thought that they know better than everybody else, right? That's just kind of how they do it. And they carry a pretty big stick whenever they want to. And so we're worried about how much money they're printing. If you look at the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars coming out into the economy, can you actually spend that much? Is there enough projects to spend that much on? And so when you have that much money in, inflation is going to go up. And so inflation is relatively low right now, but this time towards the end of this year, it's supposed to be up to almost 3% on inflation, which will be the highest that we've had. And then also you have the pressure of the devaluation of the dollar and what that means. And so does $100 today equal greater than $100 tomorrow, right? And so you have these concerns in a state about the economy being propped up by federal spending. And what does that mean 6 months, 12 months, 18 months? And that's why you hear pragmatic, you hear deliberate, you hear, even though everything looks good, and Dr. Fox mentioned about GDP growth being close to 7%, you still have to be cautious, because when all that money leaves the economy, have people overspent? Do people incur more debt? Do people use the money for recurring expenses and not non-recurring expenses, one-time expenses? And so have you created a policy in our country via the states that will bankrupt the states? And the other problem you have with the federal government is the latest round is, in my opinion, is really not needed, right? We've already had all these stimulus things. The states are recovering. If you look at how the economy's turning, it's back into a V shape. We're coming out of it. It's not a U, we're coming out of it. And all of a sudden they just keep throwing money out. And the reason is why are they doing that? Because you have other states who have not managed their state well. They haven't managed their pension funds well. They haven't cut taxes. They're hurting for businesses. And they just throw money at them to allow them to catch up to the states that have run well. And so that becomes a problem. And when Senator Watson mentions that they have strings attached to this, if you see the news today, we just joined Kentucky in a lawsuit against the Biden administration, because in the latest rounds, they say if you take the money, we can't cut taxes for 4 years. Think about that. They're changing how we can set policy in our state by accepting federal money. And that's what the federal government does. And so you have to be cautious about what you do with the federal government and what you don't do. There's always talks about expansion, about healthcare. It's always glorious. Oh, we're going to have all this money to do all this other stuff. But what's the fine print? What do you have to do with that money? How can you spend that money? And when they say that the state cannot cut taxes, that means the policies they want you to have is a high tax state. They didn't say you couldn't raise taxes. That wasn't in there. They just said you couldn't cut taxes. So just be cautious as we go through this process of looking at the bigger economic picture, the long-term objective, and not being focused just on today, where Tennessee's doing really, really well.
Yeah. My mother would say all that glimmers is not gold, right? And I think that the speaker's really wise to, send out these words of caution. The other thing that people might not realize that we actually do up here is, we're trying to think of how do we prepare ourselves for 4 or 5 years from now? Okay, so we've got all these resources today. Maybe next year we have all these resources, but 4 or 5 years from now, in our best forecasting, what's the landscape going to do like, and what can we be doing today with the resources that we have available to us that will prepare us for whatever may happen in the future? We have sustained ourselves through the pandemic because those who walked this path before us did a really good job in preparing the state and putting us in a good posture. Whether it was the unemployment trust fund, or it was our rainy day fund, or whatever it might be, we put ourselves in a good position to where we were able to weather this to be one of only, I think, 7 states that actually showed positive economic growth during the pandemic. Well, we're in that same discussion now. What do we need to be doing today that will make us prepared for whatever happens at the other end of this stimulus activity?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Speaker. So specific to economic development, we continue to be on fire as a state, even throughout the pandemic. So what are a couple of those key ingredients you think is making Tennessee so special with regard to economic development? And final question, our time's flown by here.
Well, I mean, I'll start with, it's with the business community, right? I mean, there's nothing that we can do that stimulates or creates jobs. I mean, all we do is give the policy, and try to create a policy that induces a business environment that you can thrive in, you can live in, that has opportunity, where the government's not trying to hinder you, it's trying to actually let you go out and be yourself and do what you need to do. And I think when you looked at what the state's been doing in the last 10 years, and when I go talk to groups, it's pretty, think about it this way. And I'm gonna use Republican, Democrat, and I don't know what the room is in here, so pardon this, but for the last, before 10 years now, so 100 years prior to 10 years ago, we were a Democrat-run state, Democrat-run General Assembly, Democrat-run constitutional officers. And the state did well. We did pretty good. We managed some stuff. We went through recessions. We're doing okay. But in 10 years, when Governor Haslam came in with Republicans in the House and Senate, with the constitutional officers, with Treasurer Lillard and Comptroller Mumpower now, but Wilson, in 10 years, we've had more economic development growth in our state than the previous 100. The previous 100 in 10 years. And you have to think, well, why is that? Because the philosophy now in the General Assembly is not that the government is in charge of you. You're in charge of yourself. You're in charge of your business. You're in charge of your family. You're in charge. You have accountability. And so what we've done is roll back policies in workers' comp, tort reform, unemployment, reduce business regulations, reduce taxes. We could do more in franchise and excise, and we'd love to do that because we're not competing well with other states. But what you've seen is a shift on how we treat businesses in our state. We know that the state is not what makes us successful. What makes us successful is everybody in this room and everybody who owns a business inside the state of Tennessee. And that's our philosophy. And in 10 years, when you have more economic development and growth than you did in the previous 100, it sends a message to the rest of the country what Tennessee is. And as Senator Watson said, think about it, we're one of 7 states that showed positive economic growth during a pandemic. 1 of 7. That's important. Because what that means is during the pandemic, think about it, we didn't have to raise taxes. We cut taxes. We're probably one of the only states that actually cut taxes during the pandemic. We didn't close our state. Why? Because government doesn't know it all. We think that you all have the capability of managing your business, managing your households, and doing what you need to take on the risks that you think you need to take on to achieve the goals that you need to achieve, right? When you have that philosophy, the state will be successful because you all are our economic driver, not the state.
Well, there's not a lot I can add to that other than, why wouldn't you want to live here, work here, play here, do your business here? I mean, truly, Tennessee's just a great place to do business. A lot of the reasons is as the speaker has alluded to. A lot of it is, that we have made the right policy decisions over the past decade that have put us in a good position. And I think we'll continue to make those kind of policy decisions that put people and the companies that they own or work for at the forefront of the decisions that we make. And I think when we continue to have that philosophy, we'll continue to excel.
The last thing to add is when you have Senator Watson in control of the financial committee and running the budget in our state, and you have Representative Patsy Hazelwood, let me just tell you, it's like their own money because it is their money, but they treat it where every single dime and penny, it better go for a purpose and a reason. But first and foremost, what's the number one thing that you need to do in your household? What's the number one financial thing you need to do? Save, right? Because you never know what the future holds. Senator Watson preaches it all the time. Anytime we're in budget negotiations, we need to save more money. We need to put money away for the times that's unexpected. And when you have people like that leading your state in your budget and working with the governor and Commissioner Ely, we're in very good hands. And it makes my job and Lieutenant Governor McNally's job a whole lot easier. Thank y'all.
Must have good economic financial stewardship classes in elementary schools in Hamilton County, because both chairmen are kind of
Yeah.
isolated there in Hamilton County.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
good time
well,
to be from Chattanooga.
It's true. I mean, it's true. Representative Hazelwood lives in my Senate district. I do not live in her House district, but she lives in my Senate district. So of course I have to take advice from her since she's a constituent of mine, and I want to be sure I make sure I earn her vote for the next election. So no, it's, I mean, it's, while we're handing out accolades, it makes our finance chairman's jobs easier when we have the support of our leadership. And on my side of the aisle, or on my side of the chamber is Lieutenant Governor McNally, and on Representative Chairman Hazelwood's side, it's Speaker Sexton, and that goes a long way when you can put up some pretty tough policy perspectives and know you're going to get the support of your leadership behind you. So that makes a huge difference. It's like the CFO in your company, right? As long as he can get the CEO to be on his or her side, he or she can make some pretty tough decisions.
Thank you both very much. We'll let you get back over to Cordell Hall and close out this session. Let's give them a good round of applause.
Good afternoon. I'm Kyle Spurgeon, President of the Jackson Chamber. And a few minutes ago, or actually it's a few hours ago, Bradley Jackson asked me if I would introduce Commissioner Rolfe. And I immediately said yes, because this morning I got a call from one of his project managers that we'd been shortlisted on a project. So this gives me the opportunity to say thank you. And we look forward to working together to close a deal over in Jackson. And I also got this from Bradley, and as all of us do, if you get to introduce folks, you get introduced yourself, somebody else writes these bios. I think we all do them backwards, because someone like Commissioner Rolfe probably likes what's at the very bottom. He wants me to talk about this first. So I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. He and his wife, Kathy, have been married for over 37 years and have 3 grown children and 1 grandchild. He is a member of the First Presbyterian Church in Nashville. And of all the stuff on this bio, this is probably the most impressive. He has served as an elder for not 2 years, but 2 decades. So think about that. He's been going to church there at First Presbyterian, has been an elder for 2 decades. That's pretty impressive. Now to some of the other stuff. He has served as Tennessee's ECD Commissioner since March 2017. And under his leadership, Tennessee has increased their global footprint. During Rolfe's tenure, he has led Tennessee's efforts in recruitment and expansion for over 130 international projects, which represent an investment of $6.5 billion and 21,000 jobs. Tennessee has placed a major focus on job creation and community development in rural communities. I think we've all seen that. And also since 2017, the department has provided more than $380 million in funding to rural projects, and that's created an additional 27,500 jobs. Commissioner Rolfe.
Kyle, thank you very, very much. It's a very kind, thank you, sir. As Kyle said, my name is Bobby Rolfe, and I've had the great privilege for the last 4 years to serve in our Department of Economic and Community Development. I've had a lot of very average W-2s, but I must tell you, this opportunity to provide public service has been absolutely the highlight of my career. So what I thought I would do today, you heard from 2 of our leaders, and they are our partners. And I say that to you because the General Assembly funds our budget. It's the General Assembly that's always there to help out ECD, to make sure that we don't run out of money. I'll come back to incentives in a moment, but I just want you to know it's a great partnership. And then, of course, the governor. While Alan Borden and Jamie Stetton, I and our team on the ground here in Nashville, across the 9 regions of Tennessee, and the 6 foreign direct investment officers representing us in 12 countries are all part of ECD. I can just simply tell you this. Every project today is hyper competitive. So what I thought I would do is spend just a few minutes and give you an update on what's been going on during the pandemic and what we hope is going to go on post-pandemic. Tell you a little bit about what we're focused on and just let you know how much we appreciate everybody in this room. And I say that to you because we heard Governor Lee at lunch. Our job is not, we do not physically create jobs. That's what the private sector does. But our job, if we're doing it right, is to make sure we have a very pro-business approach to recruiting companies and give them the resources, remove the red tape, work with our local partners to hopefully create a very successful landing for these companies. So in 2020, we all know the kind of year we experienced, but in 2020, I think we announced, Alan, about 100 projects, 14,000 jobs that we incented, and we set a record for capital investment. And I'm talking about the private capital investment. You're going to say, well, Bobby, I care about jobs in my community, which we do. And that's really the driver when it comes to incentives. At the same time, when a company invests $1 billion, the multiplier effect around that kind of capital is enormous. And so that capital, that was a 9-year record in spite of the pandemic. And then if you look back to 2019, what's so interesting about our data is we performed about on par, meaning Alan and his team landed about 100 jobs. It was about 14,300 projects, 14,300 jobs, and CapEx of, call it, $3 or $4 billion. So as we look back and we look forward, what we were handicapped last year is our foreign direct investment opportunities. And a lot of people may not know, but 1 out of 4 projects that we incent are foreign direct investment companies that make the decision to not only invest in the US, but look in the Southeast and then look at Tennessee. And so we've had a great track record there. Now, the bad news is the borders are still closed. I can tell you 3 months in, we had 3 major projects, large FDI projects, and we wanted to go to to their countries. And I'm sure people are going to say, well, Bobby, what's so exciting about going to Thailand and Seoul in Western Europe for 1 day? Well, the fact is that's part of our sauce. So when a prospect expresses an interest, however that lead comes, hopefully from in country, our job is to treat that just like a recruiting initiative. And guess how the successful recruiters, they go into their homes, they go into the living room, they see exactly what they're doing in their community. And then we have the opportunity to tell the Tennessee story. And as everybody in this room knows, telling the Tennessee story is a lot of fun because we have so many things to be so proud of. So as we look forward to 2021, the great news is we've had a couple of nice wins. I think one takeaway I'd like you all to think about. So we track an enormous amount of data, but what's always important to our lawmakers in the General Assembly, they all say, well, what are you doing in our community or in our region of the state? And the great news is we took the 2020 numbers and took the top largest projects, the top 10. What's interesting about the data is 4 of the top 10 were in West Tennessee, 3 were in Middle Tennessee, and 3 were in East Tennessee. And the great news is these are great global brands. And you're going to say, well, why, Bobby? Does anybody care about? Well, we heard from Holly Sullivan at Amazon about Amazon. Well, what's interesting about the recruiting game is companies follow the leader. And when they're looking for places to invest and stand up a new facility, they don't want to be the first. And so when we're able to tout the global brands that call Tennessee home, it gives us a competitive advantage. And we're very proud of that. And as I look around this room and see some of these faces that I get the privilege of recruiting with, I think you know what I'm talking about. So as we focus on 2021, Governor Lee, when he was elected, he asked us to do a couple of things. We all know what executive order number 1 is, right? What are we going to do? Let's take an inventory of the assets and what we're doing in the rural communities. Well, he asked all 23 departments to take that inventory. Ladies and gentlemen, that was easy for us to do because we spend so much time. When 4 out of 10 projects are rural, it was easy for us to provide all of that data. Nonetheless, he wants us to continue to focus on the rural communities. And he has a couple of really great initiatives that we're going to be bringing forward with the new budget. And then he's asked us to focus on the automotive sector. So this may not be a terribly heavy automotive group, but I'll just say this, when it comes to GDP across our state, number 1 is agriculture, number 2 is tourism, and number 3 is advanced manufacturing. And when you drill down beneath advanced manufacturing, automotive, over 1,000 automotive companies call Tennessee home. And it starts with the 3 OEMs, right? The original equipment manufacturers, General Motors, Nissan, and Volkswagen. And then the ecosystem, the tier 1, the tier 2, the tier 3 suppliers wrap around that ecosystem. We've been very, very successful. And an enormous amount of FDI dollars have come from these companies overseas that have followed the automotive industry. But the other part of that job 1 was we've got to protect our success in the automotive industry, in an industry, ladies and gentlemen, that's changing so fast. And when I say fast, the combustion engine will be here for a long time. They call it the ICE, I guess, internal combustion engine. And then you have the EV, the electric vehicle. And in these cases, the internal combustion engine days, while they may not be numbered in the next 10 years or 15 years,
Hi, everyone. Lauren again. I'm here to introduce Randy Boyd. Randy Boyd was appointed president of the University of Tennessee by the UT Board of Trustees, March 27, 2020. Boyd took office following the retirement of UT President Dr. Joe DiPietro. As UT's 26th president, Boyd serves as a chief executive officer of the statewide university system. Boyd served as chairman of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission and as commissioner of the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. He was a founder and co-chair of the Governor's Rural Task Force, which exists to help state government and industry leaders find solutions to the biggest challenges facing rural Tennessee. Boyd is the first in his family to graduate from college. He earned a bachelor's degree in business with an emphasis on industrial management from UT Knoxville. He also earned a master's degree in liberal studies with a focus on foreign policy from University of Oklahoma. Boyd and his wife, Jenny, live in Knoxville and they have 2 children and 2 grandchildren. Please welcome Randy Boyd.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see a few very familiar faces. Kyle, Jeff, some of my partners from before and currently. I guess Jeff and I have been partners both when I was commissioner of ECD and now at UT as well. So it's just great to be with all of you guys. A lot of familiar faces. So I want to make sure before I start, just to get some housekeeping, I was thinking that I was going to be a break between me and our former or my successor. But so everybody's been at this for a while. So I'm sure you're probably a little bit tired. I've got like what I was told 3 hours before. Is that about right? 4 hours. Okay. Well, I'm whatever time you allotted, I'm going to try to be a little short because I'm probably the last thing between the cocktail hour and you. So I'll try to do that. I thought I'd answer 4 questions and then maybe turn it over to you guys. We can go as long as you want with whatever questions you might have. I can't answer any football questions, so that probably will kind of kill some enthusiasm for me being with you today. But anyway, it's exciting to be with a bunch of folks that are supporting business across the state of Tennessee. You know, as you know, I'm a business person by background, so it's kind of fun to be able to come to the Tennessee Business Roundtable and talk to folks that are talking to the business and talk about business for a change. The work at the University of Tennessee is kind of like a business, but I can never talk about that. You know, if you ever bring up that you're a businessman or talk about actually producing or marketing, I get in really big trouble. So I'm going to share a few analogies with this group and hopefully not get in as much trouble. I thought I'd answer 4 things, like what is the University of Tennessee's mission? What are we about? That may not be a message that's gotten out as much as we wish it had. And so I thought I would share that. I'd also like to talk to you a little bit about who the University of Tennessee is. One of the things that's been really exciting about having this job is just getting to know the resources that the University of Tennessee has all across the state. And you're probably, many of you like me, you probably think, hey, you know everything about the University of Tennessee. I thought I did when I took this job. So I'm going to share just a little bit about who we are. And hopefully that every single person in the room will at least learn one thing about UT that you might not have known. So that'll be my goal, share one thing that you don't know about the University of Tennessee. You might be interested in how we coped with COVID. And I thought that was kind of topical. So I'd share a little bit about how things affected the University of Tennessee and where we're at today and where we're going. But first, I thought maybe another personal question just for Kyle and a few others that I know in the room. So how is it being a business guy running a university? When I got this job, people said, well, boy, how are you going to adjust to the slower pace of higher education? I said, no, the question is, how is higher education going to adjust with me? And I'll either get kicked out or something will change. But so far, I think we've been able to accelerate the pace at higher education. I think it's a different the University of Tennessee over the last couple of years. We're running it like a business in a lot of ways. And for those that are in the business world, so what's the same about running a university that's similar to running a business? Well, first off, you got to have a mission. You got to have a goal, something that everybody can get excited about every day that's aspiring and inspiring. Our mission is to make this the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee. Now, that's a big goal. The University of Tennessee has been around for 225 years. So say it's the greatest decade is a big challenge. And we've had some really great decades in the past. My favorite, and I did a speech a couple of years ago when we first announced this, about all the top 8 decades in my view. But I'll just mention the number 1 decade in my opinion, and that was 1961 to 71. Andy Holt was our president. And in those 10 years, we tripled enrollment from 11,000 to 34,000 students. We added the University of Tennessee Chattanooga. We added University of Tennessee Martin. We created the Institute of Public Service. We created the University of Tennessee's Institute of Agriculture. And we had our first African-American student come in 1961. We also, for those football fans, we also invented the checkerboard and running through the power tee. So a pretty good decade. So we've got a big challenge ahead of us to make this the greatest decade, but we don't mean it as an insult to anybody that came before us. We think that they would expect us to do better. And so we're trying to do that, but it's a big challenge. We're working hard toward that. But like any business, any organization, you have to have a vision, have something that gets people excited. And so that's similar. The second thing you have to do is have a strategy. And we've created a strategy to help us get there. 5 key pillars that we're working toward, and each one has metrics that we've got goals that how do you know if you win? We know exactly where we need to be able to make this the greatest decade, and the things that we're having to work on year by year, and how we're gonna measure accountability. The third thing, and this is true of any organization, you have to have great people. We're working really hard to make sure that we have the best people possible in every one of the positions. And if they're not working out, we have to make some changes. But that's, I think, the same in any organization. And finally, you have to have a set of values. And if you haven't seen them, about 2 weeks ago, we released the University of Tennessee set of values. And if you read them, hopefully you'll read them and think, this doesn't really sound like a university. And that was kind of the intent. But the values, and it doesn't really help to have a set of values if nobody can remember them. So there's 7 of them, and they fit an acronym. We're big on acronyms, B1UT, but being bold and impactful, embracing diversity, and empowering our associates, being able to be innovative and nimble. Those are kind of things that you don't necessarily hear higher education institutions being, but we're determined to live up to those set of values. So those kind of things that you would do in business, we're doing at the University of Tennessee. You got to do marketing. We got to go out and recruit students every day. We got investors. We've got the 7 million people in the state of Tennessee that all invest in us every day through their taxpayer dollars. And we work those investors through our legislators. So we've got the investor relationships that we have to do. So all the things that you normally run in an organization, you have to do at the University of Tennessee. So I'll just say, as a business person coming into the University of Tennessee, it's an incredibly exciting place to be. We've got a great organization with great talent. And everywhere you look across the state of Tennessee, we're making a difference. So if you really want to make a difference in the state of Tennessee, being at the University of Tennessee is maybe one of the best places to be. So as you can maybe gather, I'm very excited about being in this role and really loving it. So who are we? What's our mission? Well, I've mentioned that we are, our short-term goal is to make this the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee. But our longer-term mission, we were granted in 1862 by Abraham Lincoln, one of the land grant universities in the state of Tennessee. And by that, when they created the land grant university, the charge to us as the land grant university was to provide a ladder up to the working class and to the middle class, to provide opportunities for education to people across the state of Tennessee, all the universities across the country that became land grants, to provide a ladder up to people that wouldn't otherwise have gone to college. And back in 1862, if you went to college, you went to Yale or Princeton or one of these liberal arts schools and you studied theology or government, but the idea of studying and getting a degree in agriculture or in business, commerce, as they referred to it at the time in the land grant bill, but those weren't in engineering, they called it technical arts, but engineering, those weren't things that people taught in college. So the land grant bill was revolutionary in 2 ways. One, it was for the common person, everybody to get an education for a better job and a better life. And it was for areas in which colleges didn't typically focus on in the past. So we're embracing those things. We want to be that university that provides more access to more people in the state of Tennessee, to provide a ladder up to the working class and the middle class. This past year, or year before, UT Knoxville got moved up in U.S. News and World Report's rankings from 52nd to 44th. So if you think about it, that's a 20% increase, which is kind of a big increase. But and we bragged about it when we got it. But the truth is, I really don't like U.S. News and World Report's rankings. The reason why, the way you move up, one of the ways in which you move up in the rankings, and the whole thing is fairly arbitrary, But one of the ways you move up in the rankings is based on your what they call selectivity. What that means is how many students do you reject? So like if you want to be in the top 50 or top 30, let's say you had to probably reject 80% of the students that apply. If you want to be in the top 10, you got to reject like 90%. If you want to be in the top 5, you're rejecting like 97% of the people that apply. That's exactly the opposite of who we want the University of Tennessee to be. We don't want to be known for who we exclude, but who we include. We want to find new ways to bring more people into our university. So last year we introduced something called the UT Promise. If you hadn't heard about this, this is important in your communities to make sure that more people are getting access to the University of Tennessee, because sometimes it's looked at as maybe unattainable, expensive, and hard to be able to go to UT, but it's not, at least financially. In the state of Tennessee, because of the UT Promise, if you can academically earn the right to come to the University of Tennessee, any one of our campuses, and you have a family income of under $50,000, and the median household income in the state of Tennessee is $49,000. So if you're below that median household or that $50,000, you can come to any one of our campuses free of tuition and fees. The only state in the country that can offer that all across the state. And in addition, it's kind of like that old commercial, but wait, there's more. More importantly, or equally important to the financial part, we're also providing each of these students with a mentor, 3 mentors, in fact. Now with Tennessee Promise, you get a mentor. With UT Promise, you get 3. You get 1 mentor that helps you enter school, enter the university, make sure that you get all your FAFSA complete, your application complete, and get you successfully entered. Then you get a second mentor when you first enter. And this is somebody probably from the university, a faculty member, a staff member, that makes sure that you get onboarded successfully and you get off to a good start. And then finally, your last 2 years, you get a third mentor from the community, somebody that can help you transition into a job. So it's a great program, not just financially, but also to make sure that they not only go to college, but actually graduate from college. Because of that, and something that also a lot of people don't know, that 51% of the people that go to the university, one of our University of Tennessee campuses, graduate free of debt. You always hear about, oh, you go to college, you can't get a job, and you're going to graduate with $100,000 in debt. Not at UT. 51% graduate with 0 debt. And that was before the UT Promise. With the UT Promise, we believe that will be even less. So again, trying to live up to our UT mission of being the land-grant university and being more accessible. If you look at the map of the state of Tennessee, one area that wasn't being served was Southern Middle Tennessee. Do we have anybody from Southern Middle Tennessee in the room? So as you know, I recognize some faces here. If you're from Southern Middle Tennessee, there's no public 4-year higher education institution in that part of the state. From Chattanooga to Memphis, a 300-mile stretch, there's not a single 4-year public higher education school in the area. Within an 18-county area, there's only 1 private college, and that's Martin Methodist. There, the tuition is $25,000 a year. Most people in Southern Middle Tennessee, if they decide to go to college, want to go to a public school and you want to live at home, you drive 20, 30, 40 miles south across the border to Alabama, of all places, to get public in-state tuition. You can't get public in-state tuition there. You have to go to Alabama to get in-state tuition. And sadly, oftentimes when students go to another state, they don't come back. 2,000 students a year were leaving Southern Middle Tennessee to go to Alabama to go to school. We have to stop that. So this year, making it this greatest decade, we haven't had a new campus join our system in 50 years. This year, Martin Methodist is joining the UT system as UT Southern, if the legislature approves it, which we hope they do over the next 4 weeks, and it looks pretty good. But if we were able to do that, Martin Methodist becomes UT Southern. We build a firewall on the southern border, keep those 2,000 students in the state of Tennessee, and the students get a great quality education, the great brand with the University of Tennessee, and they get it for a more affordable price. It goes from $25,000 to $10,000 a year. So it's a huge win for that part of the state. So accessibility is not just financial, but also can be geographic. And this helps us solve a geographic problem we had across the state of Tennessee. So that's who we are and some of the ways in which we're trying to solve that. So back to that other question. So you may not know everything about the University of Tennessee. So just a quick summary of where we're at across the state. And again, I've discovered a lot of this just in the last 2.5 years. We'll just go, just because it's easy to remember, we'll go from west to east and start in Memphis. So in Memphis, we have the UT Health Science Center, 3,200 students studying 6 different fields of medicine, College of Medicine, dentistry, and health sciences and nursing. Of those schools, 70% of all the dentists and the doctors in the state of Tennessee come from the UT Health Science Center. So if you want to affect healthcare in the state of Tennessee, it's most likely going to come through the University of Tennessee. One of the challenges we have, we're limited with the amount of residencies that we're able to produce each year from federal funding. This year, Kevin Vaughn and our state legislature is proposing a bill for 100 new GME slots. And those we're going to be able to allocate for family practice in our rural parts of our state. And so we're really excited about that bill happening. But again, University of Tennessee Health Science Center, 70% of all of our doctors and our dentists in the state come through that organization. We go a little bit further west, you got UT Martin. You know, there's the University of Tennessee Martin in Martin. My family's from West Tennessee, from a little town of Kenton. Anybody here from rural West Tennessee? We got, okay, so here's a test. I just like to ask this, Kenton, home of the, thank you. So if you're not from that part of the state, it doesn't really mean a lot, but for us, Kenton, we're famous for the white squirrel. We invented them. There's a few other towns I've seen that actually have come up with them, but we invented them in Kenton. Anyway, I can't imagine Northwest Tennessee without the University of Tennessee Martin. It's the gateway to a better education, better success, and a better life for so many people. But even Martin's somewhat inaccessible for some people. So we've created satellite campuses in Parsons, in Ripley, and Somerville, in Selmer, and in Jackson. So we're making it more accessible to more students to get started in those satellite campuses. Thing you might not know about the University of Tennessee and UT Martin, but everybody's always wanting us to win a national championship. We did win a national championship just 3 years ago in rodeo. UT Martin had the national rodeo championship. So if you didn't know anything else about UT, know that we were a national champion in rodeo just 3 years ago. A little further east, we come to the UT Space Institute in Tullahoma. Now, there's only about 120 students there, and I did take a tour there early on in my job, and I can tell you most of it was way over my head, literally and figuratively, but here's one thing to know. We're doing some really cutting edge research on supersonics and hypersonics, and also some really interesting work around space travel. So obviously it's the UT Space Institute, so you'd expect them to work on space. Anybody here ever thought about going to Mars? Anybody just, no? Okay, well, if you did, there we go. So you probably know it takes like 5 years using chemical propulsion that we use now, but the UT Space Institute is doing research on nuclear energy to be able to take you to Mars. And using that technology, you can get there in 3 months versus the 5-year trip that is currently. So just for those of you that are interested in going to Mars, if you do, it'll be most likely because of some new technology at the UT Space Institute. UT Chattanooga, just a little bit further east, we acquired UT Chattanooga back in 1969. They had 1,000 students. Today, they have over 12,000 students. Everything that UT Martin does for Northeast Tennessee, they do for Southeast Tennessee. A really incredible school that means a lot to that part of our state. Coming back up to Knoxville as our flagship, we mentioned the fact that it moved up in U.S. News and Report. We're doing just a tremendous amount of things. There's too much to talk about, but 32,000 students last year in a nation where enrollment declined on an average of 16%. UT Knoxville's enrollment increased by 5.2%. So an incredible increase because of some of the great work that they're doing. Attached to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville is also the University of Tennessee's Institute of Agriculture. We work hand in hand with the Farm Bureau on a daily basis in so many different ways. But one of the things that not everybody knows is through the Institute of Agriculture, we have offices in all 95 counties. So there's an extension office in every one of the 95 counties. I actually had the honor being the first president to go to all 95 counties. It's kind of a thing I did when I was commissioner, and I like getting around and visiting folks, but they're doing such an incredible job in every one of our communities in so many ways. You think about the things we do like around agriculture, the master gardening program, but we also have family and consumer science agents in every county that teach nutrition and Tai Chi to the elderly. So health and nutrition to the elderly and a whole range of things. And then one of the things I'm the most proud of is that we also have an agent in every county that teaches 4-H. So if you didn't know, but the University of Tennessee manages the 4-H program across the state of Tennessee. And we have 186,000 4-H students, making it the largest 4-H program in the country. Texas is number 2, Tennessee is number 1 with 4-H. And we have so many incredible programs. things that you hear people talk about that you wish they taught in school. Like, wouldn't it be great if we taught kids how to manage their money? We have a financial management program that we teach kids how to manage their money at a very early age. We teach civics. One of the things I learned in a previous journey to get a job, which I failed to do, but ended up with a better job, by the way. But through that journey, I learned just how lacking we are in civics education. Just the lack of awareness about how government works is appalling in our state. If you didn't know, the state of Tennessee is 50th in voter turnout in a country that has low voter turnout. We got work to do. But 4-H actually teaches civics to these 186,000 kids. If you ever want to be inspired, go to 4-H Congress and watch those young people and how engaged. When you see them, you think, there's a hope for our country and our state. They're just really inspiring. But that's through the 4-H program. And then even for our young women, they have things like how to avoid dating a jerk. There's a lot of really good, useful information in there, but they have a really catchy title that get the girls to sign up. But just all sorts of ways in which 4-H is impacting youth in our state, all part of the University of Tennessee. Last thing, we also have this little science lab that we manage. I'm the chairman of the Oak Ridge National Labs. There's 5,600 engineers and scientists over in Oak Ridge that are doing some amazing work, not just for the nation, but the world and all kinds of critical areas. So hopefully through all that, maybe shared one thing, maybe national rodeo or space travel, but one thing that you didn't know about the University of Tennessee before. It's an amazing place. And again, if you need a partner to help the state of Tennessee, we would want to be that partner. In particular, when it comes to economic development, one thing that I learned very much when I was commissioner of ECD is that economic development is, or educational development is workforce development, which is economic development. If we're going to develop our economy, it's going to start with having an educated workforce. And that's one of the principal role that the University of Tennessee serves our business community. We want to make sure that we're listening and attentive and responsive. I had a couple other questions I was going to answer, but I think I've already gone longer than I meant to go. And it's much more interesting to get your questions and make sure I'm talking about the things that you're actually interested in talking about. So I'm going to stop with that and maybe turn it over to you for questions. Anything to do excluding football? That usually eliminates like 90% of the questions. Yeah. Hey, Bradley. Yeah, so the question, if anybody didn't hear, what are we going to do about the escalating costs of higher education? Well, over the last 5 years, our average increase has been less than inflation. It's been like 1.9%. Last year, we had a 0% increase. I can't guarantee that every year, but already the Health Science Center has announced that they're going to have a 0% increase in this coming year. There are 3 elements that make up our budget. 1 is the state funding, 2 is tuition, and 3 is research dollars. When we can increase the enrollment. So the tuition is twofold. It's the price of the enrollment, and then it's also, or the tuition, it's also the number of students you have coming in. If we can continue to increase enrollment, we're increasing the amount of tuition dollars that we have to spend. So when you see us being aggressive and bringing in more students, that helps us to mitigate any cost increases. The second is our research. This year we had $431 million worth of new research dollars coming in, which is a new record. We've got a very aggressive plan to increase that. We've got something called the Oak Ridge Institute, a new partnership with Oak Ridge National Labs that we believe will bring in an additional $150 million in revenue for research. So that's another revenue stream. And then finally, and importantly, there's the state aid. Now, back 15 years ago, for about a 8-year period, state aid to higher education across the country was dropping precipitously. And you can look at these charts that show at one point, the state aid to universities made up 70% of tuition. Today, it's about 30% of tuition. And that money had to come from somewhere. So what happened over that period of time, we collectively decided, let's shift the money, the burden of higher education from the taxpayer to the student. But since then, for the last 5 years or 7 years or so, the state aid to the universities has been increasing. And because of that, that's why we've been able to not have those kind of increases. As long as we can continue to earn the support of the taxpayers of Tennessee, then I think we'll be able to continue to maintain a very low tuition. Also say that the UT Promise, making it free for anybody under $50,000 is a game changer as well. And I'm also happy to report our goal last year in our first year was 2,200 students in the UT Promise and a budget of $5 million. We only had 1,100 students for a variety of reasons, COVID being one of them, and it being our first year. But the cost only was $700,000. So now we're looking at how we could potentially expand the UT Promise, whether we offer more books or other support, or maybe move the income up. So there's some opportunities there to make it more affordable for the people that need us the most. Thanks. Yeah, it's really more up to you guys. I'm good. So yes and yes. So we've already had conversations with Amazon. I think when they first announced they were moving in, I had a visit with one of their people that were in charge of the project to come here and ask about their workforce needs. And she told me that they needed like 2,000 IT workers. I said, when? And she said, tomorrow. I said, well, that's going to take a bit. So we've got a challenge to keep up with the demand there. And I don't think we can grow it all ourselves, which is another subject about community development. But with regards to, we are working hard to increase our delivery of those people with those type of talents all across our system, and not just us, but all the universities across the state. But with regards to, so it's kind of a different question, but with regards to online learning, we are doing a lot of that. We need to do more, and we need to do it better. And where I think it can make the biggest difference is with our non-traditional students, adult students that are working, that need to continue their education. One of the things that we're striving to do in this greatest decade is to provide more opportunities for adults to come back and consume knowledge in different units of measure. So we're an industry, if you will, that has only if you're in a four-year school, only 3 products for the last 100 years. We can teach you anything in the world that you want to know, as long as you want to get a bachelor's degree, master's degree, or PhD. Not everybody needs to get that particular unit of measure. What if we've had more 6-week, 8-week, 12-week programs that adults can come and get the amount of knowledge they need to do what it is they need at the time. So we're trying to figure out ways to make knowledge more consumable for adults. So one of the best ways to do that is online. One thing that's, 2 things that people need to understand about the online learning and what we went through in COVID was that while we got by, it wasn't really good for the students or the faculty. And we had a skyrocketing amount of mental health challenges with our students. While you can learn in your dorm room and never see anybody, it's not healthy. It's not healthy for our students. So the students really don't like it. The faculty don't like not having the content. And then also, I think as a business person, if I'm hiring somebody from a university to come work for me, and I want somebody that works well with others, that has good relationships, that works in teams, that can collaborate. And if you interview them and say, well, no, I don't do any of that. I just worked out of my dorm on a computer. That's probably not good. So a lot of the things we need to teach them is about collaboration, learning to work with other people. So those are things that would say that while we are going to do more online, it's not for everybody, and it's not a panacea. There's still a real need to have students come to class and be interactive and collaborative and learn together. Jeff. Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that obviously I've spent a lot of time with Dr. Fox. We talk about this on a regular basis, but yeah, Back in 2013, we hired Dr. Fox when we were looking at the drive to 55 to project out exactly what jobs we're going to need in 2025 and look at our supply and our demand and figure out all the shortages. And like, for example, we were going to be 500 short of accountants by 2025. We're going to have 12,000 too many psychology majors by the year 2025 at the rate we were going. So we were trying to calibrate, making sure we were producing what the economy needed. So when I took this job 2.5 years ago, I asked him to do the same thing and refresh the study. He said, I can't do it. It's just too unpredictable. So what you do in an unpredictable world, we've got to teach basic skills, things like project management, teamwork, being able to do critical thinking. And so you have people that are flexible, not people that can just do a particular job, but have the ability to think more broadly and be able to be more adaptive. And so that, and be able to be continuous learners as well. So we still, there's still a need for higher education to be able to teach those things, but it's different. Yes, sir. Oh, a great question. Some things, so business and engineering are the colleges that are booming everywhere, and including at UT. Engineering and business degrees at UT are the most high demand degrees. Within business, data analytics is and supply chain management are huge. But there are also some others in the health fields, like nursing. There's a huge demand for nursing. And you know, we're only able to at UT Knoxville, for example, only able to fill 1 in 10 applications. So students go other places. So there's a huge demand and somewhat of a constraint. And part of that this is maybe you guys could help us with this. If you have a legislator that brings this up, you know, in higher education, they don't need to build any more buildings because they're going to teach everything online. I don't want to go to a nurse that's never actually seen a person. You can't, where did you learn how to be a nurse? Oh, I did it online. No, I'd like to find somebody else. But there's certain things like nursing that we really need to build simulators and give them places to do that have that lab experience. But nursing is another area that's in high demand.
Hello. I have one more question for you. I
Sure.
have a mic now, so I think you can hear me
Okay.
a little bit better. How can UT through Oak Ridge, UTSI, help the Department of ECD to see what an asset we have here in Tennessee for aerospace?
Well, so I think my former colleagues at ECD understand that it's a huge asset. We just got to work more collaboratively on key projects, and we have done in the past. But there's a lot of opportunity to do more. One of the things that we're excited about with the Oak Ridge Institute is being able to calibrate some of the research that we're doing with what industry needs. Too often, some of the projects that we work on are coming from DOE or from some other sources that may or not have they're not very commercially adaptable. I know as a business person, having a company 10 miles from Oak Ridge National Labs, I had a vice president of research, and he'd go over there once a month to mine for new technologies. And there just wasn't a lot of things that were commercially applicable. That's something that we're trying to change and trying to make sure that Oak Ridge National Labs is doing world-class research that we can also at the same time create commercially viable products and services. But we have a good relationship with ECD, and being the former commissioner of ECD and now chairman of Oak Ridge National Labs, I'm determined to make those two organizations work closer together. Great. Well, if there's no other questions, it's been great being with all of you. Hopefully there's 1 or 2 things that you learned about the University of Tennessee that you didn't know before. We're excited about where we're at, but we're more excited about our future. We'll be the greatest decade in the history of the University of Tennessee, and it'll be that because of our collaboration with folks like yourself. Thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you, President Boyd. It truly is an honor to have you be with us today, and we appreciate your leadership, especially someone who's had a tremendous amount of business experience and real world experiences running one of our flagship university. I do want to recognize our sponsors again as we close out. They are all listed on here. We greatly appreciate your support. In addition, we have some upcoming events at the chamber, so you can view those by just going to our website and looking on events. There's a number, safety trainings, women in business coming up. And lastly, I do want to recognize and thank TAMA. I know there's been a lot of discussion about automotive manufacturing. Today, Ashley Fry is with us, and you all may have seen a recent announcement where the Tennessee Chamber and TAMA are partnering to really strengthen automotive manufacturing and our outreach in the state. We have some events that'll be upcoming. I think we're trying a virtual event first, and that's on April the 22nd. But in addition, there's golf. I know a lot of you on here don't like golf, so I'm kidding. This is probably the biggest golf playing bunch I've seen. But that is on May the 3rd, Susie. You can look on our, okay, 13th on our website. So with that said, thank you all so much and have a safe drive home and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.